Picture this. It's 1985 and you walk into a roadside diner. The air is thick with cigarette smoke, the jukebox is humming Springsteen, and every table's got an ashtray. Out the window, kids ride in the back of a pickup truck, no seatbelts, no helmets, just hair blowing in the wind. It was a different America, rougher, freer, and full of everyday habits that seem impossible now. We're about to step back into those memories, 30 little snapshots of life in the 80s. And hey, please subscribe to our channel, Back to Vintage America, for more of America's vintage stories. Smoking everywhere. Hard to imagine now, but in the 1980s, smoking wasn't just common, it was everywhere. Step onto an airplane, and half the seats had little ashtrays built into the armrests. Hospitals had smoking lounges. Even in restaurants, you'd sit down with your family, order a burger and fries, and the next table over might be lighting up a Marlboro. The air was always hazy. Your clothes carried the smell home, your hair too. But back then, nobody thought twice. Cigarettes were on billboards, in magazines, even on TV not long before. It wasn't rude to smoke indoors, it was expected. Today, the thought of sparking up in a hospital or a school cafeteria feels unthinkable. But in the 80s, it was just part of the background of everyday life in America. Kids in pickups. If you grew up in the 80s, you probably remember this one. A summer evening, the sun dipping low, and a pickup truck rumbling down a two-lane road. In the back, a bunch of kids sitting on the wheel wells, legs dangling, hair whipping in the breeze. No seatbelts, no helmets, no worries. It wasn't reckless. It was freedom. Parents didn't panic, neighbors didn't call the cops, and kids loved every second of it. You felt 10 feet tall, like you were riding on top of the world. Today it'd cause an uproar. Child safety laws, car seats, liability fears. None of that was on people's minds back then. In 1980s America, piling kids into the bed of a pickup wasn't just normal, it was part of growing up. Latchkey kids. In the 1980s, a whole generation of kids were what they called latchkey kids. School let out, you walked home, unlocked the door with a house key around your neck, and the house was empty. Mum and Dad were both at work, and that was just how it was. The TV became your babysitter. A peanut butter sandwich, maybe a microwaved pizza roll, and hours of cartoons or Nintendo until your parents got home. Nobody thought it was neglect, it was independence. You learned how to take care of yourself, how to handle being alone. Today, leaving a kid alone like that might trigger a call to child services, but back in the 80s, the latchkey routine was ordinary life. For many, it was the first real taste of freedom. Payphones on every corner. Back before cell phones lived in every pocket, the payphone was your lifeline. You carried a pocket full of quarters, maybe even a phone card, just in case. They stood on street corners, outside gas stations, in every mall. You'd step inside the little glass booth, close the door, and make your call while the world rushed by outside. If you ran out of change, you dialed collect, sometimes speaking fast enough during the operator's prompt so your parents wouldn't get charged. Today, the idea of hunting down a payphone just to make a call feels ancient. But in the 80s, it was part of daily life. Stranger danger, not a thing. In the 1980s, kids had a freedom that shocks people today. Walking home alone from school, hopping into a neighbor's car for a ride, talking to strangers on the sidewalk. It wasn't considered risky, it was considered normal. Parents trusted the neighborhood, and kids roamed in packs or sometimes alone without fear. Of course, news reports later made everyone more cautious, but for much of the decade, stranger danger wasn't even a phrase most families thought about. To grow up then was to grow up with trust, and maybe a little naivety that we don't see anymore. Drinking from the hose, hot summer day, a baseball game in the yard, sweat dripping down your forehead. Nobody ran inside for bottled water, you just grabbed the garden hose. The water came out warm at first, tasted like rubber and metal, but you gulped it down anyway. Nobody thought twice about germs, plastic filters, or fancy labels. Back then, the hose was the ultimate thirst quencher, shared among friends, passed from hand to hand. Today it feels unthinkable, but in the 80s, that simple green hose was all you needed to cool off paper route kids. Before dawn, the sound of a bicycle coasting down quiet streets, a canvas bag slung over a kid's shoulder, heavy with rolled-up newspapers. One by one, they'd fly through the air, landing with a thud on porches and driveways. Paper routes weren't for adults, they were kids' jobs. Rain or shine, weekday or weekend, you were expected to show up. It taught responsibility, and for many, it was the first real paycheck. Today, it's rare to see kids working like that, but in 1980s America, the morning paper route was a rite of passage. No helmets, bikes, skateboards, roller skates. Kids in the 80s rode them all without a helmet in sight. You might scrape your knee, chip a tooth, or break an arm, but helmets were for football players, not for kids on the sidewalk. Parents patched you up with a Band-Aid and sent you back out. Nobody had a garage full of safety gear, just a bike, a driveway, and endless afternoons of fun. Today, it'd look reckless. Back then, it was just childhood, leaving kids in the car. Quick errand at the grocery store. In the 80s, parents thought nothing of leaving the kids in the car with the windows cracked. You'd sit there, maybe play with the radio, maybe climb into the front seat, and pretend to drive. Nobody panicked, nobody called the police. It wasn't neglect, it was normal. Today, leaving a child alone in a parked car can get you arrested. But in the 1980s, it was just another ordinary Saturday, airplane freedom. Flying in the 80s was a whole different world. You could walk right up to the gate without taking off your shoes or standing in a security line. Families greeted loved ones right as they stepped off the plane. Kids pressed their noses against the glass to watch the jets. On board, smoking was allowed, seats were roomier, and the whole process felt casual. No TSA, no body scanners, no endless checkpoints. Today, air travel feels strict and exhausting. Back then, it felt almost glamorous and much more free. Ashtrays in cars. Climb into almost any car in the 1980s and you'd find an ashtray built right into the dashboard. Some even had two, one for the driver, one for the passenger. They weren't there for decoration either. Many were overflowing with cigarette butts, half-burned matches, and the faint smell of stale smoke. Kids rode in the back while parents puffed away in the front. Windows barely cracked. Lighters popped out of the dash with a satisfying click, glowing orange ready to light the next smoke. Today it seems unimaginable to fill a family car with cigarette smoke. But back then it was just part of driving in America. Spanking in schools. In the 80s, discipline in schools could still mean a trip to the principal's office for a spanking. Many principals kept a wooden paddle hanging right there on the wall, a quiet warning for any kid who stepped out of line. Parents didn't argue, teachers didn't hesitate, and kids knew it was a real possibility. It wasn't considered abuse, it was considered order. Most kids tried to avoid it, but everyone knew someone who got the paddle. Today, the idea of striking a student would end a career and spark a lawsuit. But 40 years ago, corporal punishment was a normal part of education. Video rental, rituals. Friday night meant one thing in the 1980s, a trip to the video store. Blockbuster, mom-and-pop shops, shelves lined with VHS tapes in colorful boxes. Families wandered the aisles, arguing over action, comedy, or cartoon. New releases were always gone fast, so you checked the Dropbox, hoping a tape had just been returned. The whole ritual, grabbing snacks, picking the movie, rushing home to pop it in the VCR, was an event in itself. Today, streaming a film takes seconds. Back then, the hunt for the perfect rental was half the fun. TV dinners, trays. Frozen meals in foil trays were a staple of 1980s America. Swanson, banquet. Pop them in the oven, wait 40 minutes, and out came meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and a little dessert, all in their own compartments. Families set up folding trays in front of the television, eating while Wheel of Fortune or Cheers played in the background. Microwave meals arrived too, faster, but never quite the same. TV dinners weren't gourmet, but they were convenient, and they carried a special ritual: food and television together. Today it feels outdated. In the 80s it felt futuristic. Seatbelt optional, Cars in the 80s had seatbelts, but a lot of folks didn't bother with them. The car would beep, maybe flash a little red light, and people would just ignore it. Kids stretched out in the back seat, sometimes even lying across the rear window ledge on long drives. Nobody thought twice. Seatbelt laws were only just starting, and many resisted them, saying buckling up felt restrictive. Today, it's automatic, click it or get fined. But in 1980s America, driving unbuckled was the norm, not the exception. No cell phones. When it was time to go home in the 80s, parents didn't text or call, they yelled out the front door. Kids heard their name echo through the neighborhood and knew dinner was ready. Sometimes the call came from the end of the block, other times from the porch, hands cupped around Mum's mouth. You might have been 2 streets over, deep in a game of kickball, but eventually you heard the voice and ran home. Today parents track kids by GPS. Back then, a loud shout across the neighborhood was all it took. Polaroid, pictures. Instant photography was magic in the 80s. You snapped a shot, the camera spit out a square picture, and you shook it in your hand as the image slowly appeared. Birthday parties, vacations, graduations. So many memories captured on those little white-bordered prints. You didn't edit, filter, or retake. What you got was what you kept. And those Polaroids often ended up tucked into albums stuck on the fridge or passed around like treasures. Today, photos vanish into clouds and screens. In the 80s, they developed right in your hand. Shopping mall, hangout. For teenagers in the 1980s, the mall was more than a shopping center. It was the social hub. You went there to meet friends, cruise the halls, eat at the food court, maybe see a movie. Malls had arcades, record stores, clothing shops blasting the latest hits. On weekends, they were packed with kids just hanging out. No one was glued to a screen. This was face-to-face time, with pretzels, soda, and endless laps around the atrium. Today, malls are fading, but back then, they were the heartbeat of teenage life. Rotary phones. Making a phone call in the 1980s often meant using a rotary phone. You'd stick your finger in the dial, spin it around, and wait for it to click back before dialing the next number. If you messed up on the last digit, you had to start all over again. Phones were tethered to the wall, cords stretched down hallways as kids tried to find a little privacy. Long-distance calls cost money, so you kept them short. Today we complain about slow Wi-Fi. In the 80s, making a simple call was its own ritual. Milk carton kids. In the 1980s, breakfast sometimes came with a reminder of real-life fears. Sitting at the table with a bowl of cereal, you'd turn your milk carton and see the photo of a missing child printed on the side. It was one of the earliest nationwide efforts to raise awareness about missing kids. For families, it was sobering, right there next to the morning comics and cartoons. Today, Amber Alerts buzz on phones, but back then, the faces of missing children were literally on your breakfast table. Glass soda bottles. Soda in the 80s didn't just come in cans and plastic, it came in heavy glass bottles. Ice cold from the vending machine, they clinked together as you carried them home. And when you were done, you didn't throw them away, you returned them for a few cents each. That little deposit made kids into scavengers, collecting empties from the neighborhood for pocket change. Today, glass bottles are a novelty, something you hunt down for nostalgia. But in the 1980s, they were the everyday way to drink a Coke. Library. Microfilm. Before Google, there was microfilm. If you needed to research an old newspaper, you went to the library, loaded up a reel of film, and scrolled through endless blurry pages on a glowing screen. The hum of the machine, the whir of the film, and the smell of old paper filled the air. It wasn't fast and it wasn't easy, but there was something magical about finding a headline from decades past, hidden in that river of text. Today, answers are a click away. In the 80s, knowledge came one frame of microfilm at a time. Unfiltered playground fun. Playgrounds in the 1980s were built from metal and wood, not rubber and plastic. Slides got blistering hot under the summer sun. Monkey bars left blisters on your hands. and seesaws could knock the wind out of you if you weren't careful. Parents sat on benches, barely watching, and kids learnt the hard way, scraped knees, bloody noses and all. It wasn't about safety ratings, it was about adventure. Today's playgrounds are cushioned and padded, but in the 80s they were rough, risky, and unforgettable. Roller rinks. Few places captured the spirit of the 80s like the roller rink. Disco lights spinning, music thumping, kids skating in circles for hours under the glow of a mirror ball. Couples held hands, friends raced around, and the smell of popcorn and soft pretzels filled the air. The rink was part exercise, part social club, and part rite of passage. Today, most have vanished. But back then, roller rinks were the heartbeat of Friday nights in towns across America. VHS tracking struggles. Watching a movie on VHS wasn't always smooth. Sometimes the picture was fuzzy, with those horizontal lines dancing across the screen. That's when you reached for the tracking knob on the VCR, twisting it back and forth until the image cleared. It was a ritual every household knew, and it often sparked frustration when the fuzz wouldn't go away. Today, streaming is flawless. In the 80s, wrestling with VHS tracking was just part of movie night. Cold War drills. Even in the 1980s, the shadow of the Cold War was everywhere. Schools still practiced duck and cover drills, kids crouching under desks, hands over their heads, as if that would protect them from a nuclear blast. Sirens wailed in test runs and fallout shelter signs were posted in public buildings. For a whole generation, the threat of the Cold War was part of growing up. Today, it feels like history. But in the 80s, it was a daily reminder that the world wasn't as safe as it seemed. Arcades everywhere, the glow of neon, the clink of tokens, and the steady blip, blip of Pac-Man. In the 1980s, arcades were everywhere. Malls, pizza parlors, bowling alleys, rows of machines, each one swallowing quarters as kids battled Donkey Kong, Galaga, or Street Fighter. High scores were a badge of honor, your initials glowing on the screen for everyone to see. Today, video games live in every home, but in the 80s, the arcade was the kingdom and quarters were your ticket in. TV sign-offs. Television didn't run all night in the 1980s. When the day was done, stations played the national anthem, sometimes with a waving flag or a montage of American landscapes. Then the screen went dark, replaced by static. That hiss and snowy picture meant bedtime for millions of kids who'd fallen asleep on the couch. Today, TV runs 24/7. But back then, the sign-off was a nightly ritual, marking the end of the broadcast day. Gas station full service. Pulling into a gas station in the 80s often meant you didn't lift a finger. Attendants came to your window, pumped the gas, checked your oil, even washed your windshield while you waited. You stayed in the car, rolled down the window and handed over a few bills. It felt personal, almost neighborly. Today, full service is rare, a novelty in a few states. But back then, it was the norm. One more way, life in America felt a little more hands-on and a little more human. So much of it sounds impossible now. Kids riding loose in pickup trucks, cigarette smoke in restaurants, parents leaving us in the car while they ran into the store. Almost reckless by today's standards. But back then, it wasn't shocking. It was just life. The 1980s were full of little rituals we didn't think twice about. Drinking from the hose, skating around the roller rink on a Friday night, spending quarters at the arcade until our pockets were empty. These weren't rare moments, they were the rhythm of everyday America. Looking back, it wasn't perfect, but it was freer, simpler, and in so many ways more human. We didn't have smartphones or Wi-Fi or a million rules telling us what not to do. We just lived, and we didn't know how special those ordinary days really were. Now I want to hear from you. What do you remember from the 80s that would shock people today? Drop it in the comments, because these stories aren't just mine, they're ours. And if you want more of these trips back in time, please subscribe to our channel Back to Vintage America for more of America's vintage stories. Every week, we dust off another piece of the past and bring it back to life. Because the best way to remember where we're going is to never forget where we've been.